This is Matthew Kratter's Bitcoin University. Today I want to talk about Bitcoin Core just going rogue. This has just happened. We've been talking about it, that it could happen for a couple of weeks, but it has actually happened now. First, some necessary background. Bitcoin Core, this is the free and open source software that most Bitcoin nodes run, what's often called the reference implementation of the consensus rules. Though as we'll see, this is rapidly changing as Bitcoiners dump Bitcoin Core software and flee to Bitcoin NOTs software at an ever-increasing rate. Bitcoin Core can also refer to the devs, the software devs or developers who work on Bitcoin Core software. So when I say that Bitcoin Core has gone rogue, what I'm talking about the Bitcoin Core devs who've gone off the deep end and decided to change the software in ways that are not generally accepted by the wider Bitcoin community. Most Bitcoiners just want to use Bitcoin as money, but Bitcoin Core devs seem especially keen to cater to non-monetary uses of Bitcoin, like making it easier for crypto VCs and their startups and malicious mining pools to embed JPEGs and other non-monetary garbage on Bitcoin. This entire debate is about whether Bitcoin node runners like you and me are to be given the freedom to choose whether or not to relay spam transactions to other nodes and miners. And Bitcoin Core devs want to take away that freedom by changing the software in ways that are good for crypto VCs and miners, but really bad for node runners who are being forced to relay and store spam that doesn't benefit them in any way. And Bitcoin Core has decided to go ahead and make a change to the software that creates more space for spammers to put their spam in a place that's called the op return. Here's the change which will be added to the next software version of Bitcoin Core, which is going to be released, I believe, in October. We can see this PR, this pull request, has been merged, which means that this change is about to be made to the software. The decision has already been made, and nothing can stop it at this point. This software change will allow spammers to put up to 100,000 bytes of spam into the op return part of a transaction, while the previous limit was 83 bytes. And that's a massive and unnecessary expansion of a space that was always intended to have a very small footprint, the op return space. This is a huge departure from how Bitcoin Core has traditionally treated non-monetary data on Bitcoin. Bitcoin culture and even Bitcoin Core until fairly recently, maybe until 2023, they've always been anti-spam, Bitcoin culture and Bitcoin Core, and the op return space was given as a small concession to people who really wanted to put non-monetary data onto Bitcoin. This small concession was never intended to be blown open to include large amounts of data, as the software change will now allow. If you're finding this video helpful so far, I'll pause just really briefly here to ask you to help to support this channel's educational mission. Hit the subscribe button, that does really help. Leave a like, leave a comment, question, suggestion for a future video, and share this video with a friend or family member. Now, what's especially disturbing is that this is the first time that Bitcoin Core has unilaterally decided to move forward with what is a highly contentious change in the community. When Bitcoiners asked Bitcoin Core a few years back to include a patch that would have helped to filter out most inscription spam, Bitcoin Core devs said that the patch was too controversial and thus could not be added. This is what this highly biased article says. Bitcoin developers, this was Luke Dasher's proposal to stop spam NFTs get shut down, putting spam in quotes as if people have no idea what spam is. Of course, it's things like JPEGs, which are non-monetary. But if we take a look here at how contentious this pull request, this PR was, this article from CoinDesk writes, a few days ago, Ava Chow, a Bitcoin Core maintainer, abruptly cut off further discussion of Dasher's proposal, technically known as a pull request or PR, without taking any action to incorporate the fresh code. According to the webpage for the open source Bitcoin Core project, maintainers are responsible for adding code changes that the team agrees should be merged. Quote from Ava Chow, quote, it's abundantly clear that this PR, this pull request or software change, is controversial and in its current state has no hope of reaching a conclusion that is acceptable to everyone. At this point in time, I see no reason to leave this open and continue to send notifications for the constant back and forth stalemate discussion. Again, it's abundantly clear that this PR is controversial, so they closed the PR without merging it. This is the difference here. That change to Bitcoin, which would have limited spam, was deemed too controversial to proceed. The current op return change to Bitcoin is also highly, highly controversial, as you'll notice if you've been on Twitter and elsewhere. But this change is being made anyway, against the general wishes of the wider Bitcoin community. So the question is, why are Bitcoin Core changes or lack of changes always in the direction of more spam? Isn't that really weird when in the past Bitcoin culture was always anti-spam? And I'll put a link to my video about that. Bitcoin culture has always been anti-spam. As Samson Mao points out from a couple days ago, Bitcoin Core devs have been changing the network gradually to enable spam and now seem focused on also removing barriers for spammers like the op return filter. It's disingenuous to just say it is what it is now, too bad. The statement itself was also inappropriate, etc. This meme I think is pretty good and summarizes the situation. First, we told them we don't merge controversial PRs, and then we merged the PR, meaning the op return one. So there's definitely something very, very weird going on here. Has Bitcoin Core been infiltrated by intel agencies who want to corrupt Bitcoin from the inside? I'd be really surprised if an organization this important had not already been at least partially infiltrated many years ago. Or is it another explanation? Are Bitcoin Core devs being somehow compensated by malicious mining pools or crypto VCs or their startups in exchange for opening up new space for spam on the blockchain? Or is this just a case of trying to please friends and colleagues in the space who now work at crypto startups that want this change? The Bitcoin community's response to Bitcoin Core going rogue has been to continue to flee to an alternate version of the Bitcoin node software called Bitcoin Knots, which is basically Bitcoin Core plus some added filters and protections that Luke Dasher maintains. But we can see this chart going vertical, Bitcoin, the number of people running Bitcoin Knots. And if we scroll up here, we can see now that 11.38% of the network runs Bitcoin Knots and only 88.39% runs Bitcoin Core. This is unprecedented. We've never seen this happen before in Bitcoin's history, and people, plebs, regular Bitcoiners are obviously very upset about this change, which is why they're switching over from running their nodes using Bitcoin Core to running their nodes using Bitcoin Knots. And some of the giants in the Bitcoin space, as you might expect, are also appalled by these changes that Bitcoin Core is forcing through. People like Bitcoin Mechanic, Jimmy Song, Samson Mao, Luke Dasher, Parker Lewis, and Tomer Strolight, and many, many others. But I wanted to just give you a selection. This is from Mechanic posting that Bitcoin Core offered a formidable defense against fiat creep infecting the space. It has now fallen and we're down to the last line of defense, Bitcoiners. If they fail to recognize what's going on and continue on the core path, then the foundation will have rotted out and the fate namely of Bitcoin is sealed. Bitcoin can survive malicious devs acting against nodes in theory. Now that theory is being put to the test, and I hope to God it plays out that way, etc. Current adoption of Core 30, which of course doesn't exist, is at 0%. But what he's saying basically is when Bitcoin Core goes rogue, it's really up to Bitcoiners to flee to another client like Bitcoin Knots. Otherwise, Bitcoin Core does have absolute power over Bitcoin. Jimmy Song writes here, op return outputs greater than 83 bytes will increase significantly. UTXO bloat will keep getting worse and there will be more garbage on the chain. This is going to age like a bad tattoo. And of course, he clarifies that op returns don't contribute to UTXO bloat, but the inscriptions hack does. As he says here, geez, I'm saying that the UTXO bloat is going to get bigger because nothing is being done about the actual spam that's bloating it, inscriptions at all. Not that op return outputs are in the UTXO set. And Jimmy does know his technicals in Bitcoin, so I don't think anyone's going to question him there. Samson Mao, Bitcoin price might be up, but it's a sad day when the Bitcoin devs no longer build software for Bitcoin users. It is a paradox, and Bitcoin does have a history of rallying during these sort of civil wars, as happened in 2016 and 2017. Luke Dasher, who's behind Bitcoin Knots and behind Ocean, and one of the few Bitcoin devs who seems to understand this problem of spam and how spam controlled with mining pool centralization could be the death knell for Bitcoin. He did a NAC, which means he doesn't approve, saying the goals of transaction relay listed are basically all wrong. Predicting what will be mined is a centralizing goal. Expecting spam to be mined is defeatism. Helping spam propagate is harmful. This op-ed, meaning this op-ed that Bitcoin Core put out 2 days ago, this op-ed contradicts itself, presenting out-of-band relays, that's where you go direct to the miner, as both negative and, quote, also an important aspect of Bitcoin censorship resistance. It ignores the lack of consent to spam. This is very important. It ignores the lack of consent to spam by users, node operators, giving deference to the attackers and the malicious miners who might conspire with them. It paints spam as quote-unquote largely harmless, when the truth is the exact opposite. It treats the abuse of the blockchain and nodes as legitimate use cases rather than DOS attacks, denial of service attacks. They actually are, and speaks of DOS attacks as if they were something distinct, thus applying spam isn't the same, which it is. This op-ed presents itself as aligned with Bitcoin's long-term health, which is objectively false, and miners' rational self-interest, which is also at least debatably false. Parker Lewis writes in the latest post, mining decentralization was never a credible argument. This is one of the explanations by Bitcoin Core why they were pushing this through, because they were saying they did not want to increase mining centralization, which is already a huge problem that Bitcoin Core has been sleeping on. But Parker writes, mining decentralization was never a credible argument. It was always a rationalization and a logically inconsistent one. The only reason removing the op return limit was even considered was due to the extent of miner centralization. Consciously or subconsciously, Core exploited it. And then Tomer writes, in some people's theory, filters can't stop inscriptions, runes, BRC20s, etc., all this Bitcoin spam or spam on Bitcoin. In practice, however, these things have plummeted since the movement to run knots has spread, even at negligible chain fee levels. The exchange value of them has also collapsed. Now, correlation does not necessarily mean causation, but even dumb shitcoiners are smart enough to see the risks this poses destroying value in non-financial transactions on Bitcoin. Bitcoiners will F up your ship. Meanwhile, we've learned or are learning that we can't and shouldn't have a dependency on trusting Bitcoin Core because their theories might be flawed, compromised, or even corrupted. A huge win for decentralization, the true core of Bitcoin, rather than Bitcoin Core being the true core. I really like that comment. And then Parker Lewis has a good warning for people here. I would encourage anyone running Bitcoin Core to do their own research on this one before upgrading when released, presumably in October. The horrible precedent it sets and the combined risk of a centralized core, centralized Bitcoin Core, plus centralized mining pools creates an untenable situation. Op return is a distraction. And I would go one better than Parker and say, don't even bother upgrading Bitcoin Core. And in fact, the Bitcoin Core version, the older versions you're running, don't properly deal with spam. So you should just run Bitcoin knots, run the default settings in there. Also linked to a couple videos here that allow you to tweak the settings as you see fit. It's time to start running your own Bitcoin knots node and taking back your power. So I'll put a link to this in the description notes below. These are all these different resources that you can use to either switch to knots if you're already running Core, or how to download a Bitcoin knots node and run the software on your laptop, on your desktop, on Start9 or Umbrel on a personal server like that. You can run one of these. This is what I use. I have the server 1, which is from Start9, but you can also build your own. And Bitcoin Not Crypto had a great video here, how to run a Bitcoin node on a do-it-yourself startup, a mini PC server, as well as a follow-up. So this one teaches you how to flash the StartOS operating system for free on a mini PC server. And then the next video in this series shows you how to run a node using Start9, the StartOS operating system, and the Bitcoin Knots software on StartOS. There's another great one here from Paul Lamb, switch from Bitcoin Core to Knots, and he shows you how to do it on Windows, Mac, Linux, Start9, Umbrel, MyNode, and Raspi Blitz. And there's also very interesting, I would say the first 15 or 20 minutes are also very interesting, in which Paul talks about how he previously, a few years ago, was actually in favor of spam on Bitcoin, and he inscribed something for his wife for their anniversary, their wedding anniversary, a poem or a picture or something like that. And then he realized how wrong this was to be forcing node runners 100 years from now in the global south who'd have to download and store his data, his picture of his wife and stuff after their family was long gone and he and his wife were long gone, and just how unethical this is. So I really like his perspective at the beginning of this video. Be sure to subscribe and like Bitcoin Not Crypto, as well as Paul Lamb's channel, and help out these growing channels because they're doing really, really good work. Also wanted to link to something I don't think I've talked about before, and I haven't used one of these, but Parman does seem like a good guy online. So the Parman node is another way of doing this. You can buy it and it will come fully shipped. You'll either get a laptop or a Raspberry Pi or a NAS server mini PC that you can use to run Bitcoin knots and also to run a few other Bitcoin apps. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.